I've often wondered if there's a Guinness World Record for the most unnecessary, over-the-top emergency response triggered by a single individual's spectacular meltdown. If there is, I think my neighbor, let's call her Karen Prime, might just be a contender. And the truly delicious chef's kiss part of this whole saga, my wife was the 911 dispatcher who took the call. Oh, you're going to want to stick around for this one, folks. It's a doozy. Go ahead and drop a comment. Let me know where you're watching from, because this story of suburban warfare, or rather, rural ranch versus encroaching entitlement is one for the ages. It all started, as these things often do, with a little bit of peace and quiet being shattered by the arrival of someone who believed the world revolved around their whims. I own a decent-sized ranch, a couple of 100 acres of rolling hills, creek beds, and old-growth oak that's been in my family for 3 generations. It's my sanctuary. My business. I run cattle and have a small organic farming operation. And my home. I'm a retired civil engineer, so I appreciate order, well-defined boundaries, and things making logical sense. My wife, Sarah, works as an emergency dispatcher for the county. A high-stress job, but she's incredible at it. Calm under pressure, decisive, and with an almost supernatural ability to sift truth from panic-stricken babble. You'll see just how good she is. The trouble began when a new, rather pretentious housing development sprouted up along one edge of my property line. They called it Whispering Pines Estates, though the only whispering was probably the sound of Old Man Henderson, my predecessor, spinning in his grave at the sight of these McMansions on their tiny manicured lots. And with Whispering Pines came its HOA, and with the HOA came its self-appointed queen, Karen Prime. Karen, whose real name was probably something innocuous like Susan or Jennifer, drove a gleaming white Range Rover that rarely saw a speck of dust, despite the gravel access road to her mini palace. She had that helmet of blonde hair that looked like it could deflect small arms fire, a permanent expression of distaste, and a wardrobe that screamed golf club luncheon, even when she was just getting her mail. Our initial interactions were, shall we say, strained. She'd complain about the smell of cow manure, which, to be fair, is a thing when you live next to a cattle ranch. I'd politely point out the ranch was there first, by about 70 years. She'd fuss about the sound of my tractor early in the morning. I'd explain that farming, like the sun, waits for no one. I even had to gently correct her once when she tried to tell me my fence was 3 feet onto HOA common land. Being an engineer with a lifelong passion for surveying, I had my property lines plotted down to the millimeter, backed by county records and GPS data. I showed her the official plat map. She huffed and said, "Well, it looks wrong." That was Karen Prime, in a nutshell. Feelings over facts, especially when the facts inconvenienced her. I'm a patient man. I believe in being a good neighbor, but Karen seemed to view my property not as a working ranch, but as an untamed wilderness that existed solely to inconvenience her aesthetic sensibilities and her delusion of grandeur. She would take to calling the sheriff's non-emergency line for the most trivial things. A loose strand of barbed wire on my side of the fence, which I'd fix within hours of noticing anyway. The alarming sight of my old bull Ferdinand grazing peacefully near the property line, or even dust kicked up by my truck on my own dirt roads. Each time a deputy would sigh, drive out, take a look, and tell her there was no issue. It was becoming a running joke down at the station, or so Sarah told me. With a weary smile, the other residents of Whispering Pines were a mixed bag. Some were perfectly pleasant, even apologetic for Karen's behavior. They'd wave if they saw me, and a couple had even bought produce from my farm stand. Others, however, seemed to be firmly under Karen's thumb. A sort of beige-clad chorus of enablers who nodded along to her pronouncements at HOA meetings, probably too intimidated or too apathetic to challenge her. They were the ones who allowed her to feel like the undisputed monarch of her little subdivision kingdom, a kingdom she clearly felt should extend its dominion over my ancestral lands. Little did she know her reign was about to encounter a rather significant constitutional crisis, orchestrated by yours truly and inadvertently at first by my very own Sarah. The stage was being set for a confrontation, and Karen, bless her entitled heart, was about to bring a metaphorical bullhorn to a chess match. The slow burn of Karen's passive aggression had been simmering for months. I'd installed a few extra no trespassing signs along the boundary with Whispering Pines. Not that I thought they'd deter someone as brazen as her, but more to establish a clear legal baseline. As a civil engineer, documentation is second nature. I also made sure my liability insurance was up to date. A good practice for any landowner. but especially when you have a Karen lurking on your borders. My ranch is crisscrossed with old deer trails and utility easements, and while I'm generally tolerant of respectful hikers who ask permission, Karen was not the type to ask, nor to be respectful. Sarah had mentioned a few training sessions at dispatch about handling sovereign citizen types and those with extreme entitlement complexes. She said it was like Karen's photo was on the training slides. One of the more irritating, though thankfully infrequent occurrences, was finding discarded latte cups or designer dog waste bags just inside my fence line. It was petty, infuriating, and almost certainly Karen's handiwork. Though proving it was nigh impossible, it was death by 1,000 paper cuts, or perhaps 1,000 artisanal coffee containers. I'd even found one of her perfectly manicured garden gnomes, a particularly smuggle-looking fellow placed defiantly on a fence post on my side of the line. I relocated him to the county dump. I sometimes wondered if she was trying to provoke a reaction to create an incident that would allow her to play the victim and rally the HOA against the unruly rancher. If so, she was about to get her wish, though not in the way she imagined. The groundwork for her dramatic overreach was being meticulously laid brick by entitled brick, and the foundation was her own breathtaking arrogance. She consistently underestimated me, seeing me as some kind of uncultured yokel despite my professional background and the fact that I could probably buy and sell her little plot 5 times over. That underestimation, as you'll see, was a critical error on her part. The incident that finally tipped the scales from simmering annoyance to full-blown farce happened on a crisp autumn afternoon. I was out on the far western stretch of my property, an area that bordered a thickly wooded section of the Whispering Pines common land. This particular patch of my ranch included a small spring-fed pond that was vital for my livestock, especially during the drier months. I was checking the fence line there, a routine task, making sure there were no breaks that could let my cattle wander, or more pertinently, let unwanted visitors in. The leaves were turning gold and crimson, and the air was sharp and clean. It was the kind of day that made you glad to be alive and working outdoors. That peace, however, was about to be rudely interrupted by a splash of aggressively bright pink athleisure wear moving through the trees on my side of the fence. I squinted. Sure enough, it was Karen Prime. She was clambering around near the edge of my pond, phone in hand, snapping pictures, not just of the pond, but seemingly of the surrounding vegetation, the fence posts, even the muddy bank where my cows like to drink. She was a good 50-yard inside my property line, a line clearly marked with a sturdy barbed wire fence, and at least 2 prominent no trespassing signs within her immediate vicinity. My first thought, I'll admit, was a surge of pure, unadulterated irritation. My second thought, more pragmatically, was to get my own phone out and start recording. If there's one thing my engineering career taught me, it's that data is king. Video evidence is the emperor. I walked towards her, not aggressively, but steadily. "Afternoon, Karen?" I called out when I was about 20 feet away. "Bit far from home, aren't you?" She jumped, startled, and spun around, nearly dropping her phone into the mud. Her face, when she saw me, went through a rapid series of emotions. Surprise, then annoyance, then that familiar haughty indignation. "This is HOA property," she declared, her voice a little shaky but rapidly gaining its usual strident tone. "I'm conducting an environmental survey." I stopped a few feet from her, making sure my phone was clearly capturing her and the fence line behind her, indisputably on my land. "Actually, Karen," I said, keeping my voice calm and level, "this is very much my property. The HOA land ends back there beyond that fence you just climbed over. Your trespassing." I gestured towards the fence, and I believe those signs are quite clear. "Nonsense," she scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. "Our documents clearly show this pond as a shared resource. It's probably feeding runoff into our pristine common areas." She looked genuinely affronted, as if my pond was personally victimizing her manicured Bermuda grass. "My pond, my runoff, My land. I reiterated, my patience wearing thin. I've dealt with my share of difficult contractors and obstinate bureaucrats in my engineering days, but Karen's sheer denial of physical reality was in a league of its own. I have the plat maps, the survey markers, everything you're trespassing. I'd appreciate it if you'd return to your side of the fence. Her eyes narrowed. This was the point where a normal person might feel a twinge of embarrassment, perhaps even offer an apology. Not Karen Prime. I don't have to go anywhere, she snapped. You can't intimidate me. I know my rights. Then, with a dramatic flourish that would have done a silent film star proud, she whipped out her phone again. I'm calling 911. You're threatening me. Threatening her? I hadn't raised my voice, hadn't moved aggressively, hadn't done anything other than state facts on my own land. I almost laughed. Go right ahead, Karen, I said, a small, grim smile playing on my lips. Tell them all about it. Inside, a little spark of amusement ignited. Sarah was on duty today. This was going to be interesting. I could already picture Sarah at her console, headset on, that look of weary professionalism masking an internal eye roll as the call came through. Karen stabbed at her phone screen, then held it to her ear. Her voice, now laced with a theatrical tremor, carried clearly in the still afternoon air. 911, what's your emergency? I heard faintly from her earpiece, and then Karen launched into her performance. Yes, I need help immediately. I'm being threatened by a hostile man on HOA property. He's trying to drive me off. I'm near the Whispering Pines' common area by the disputed pond. Her eyes flicked towards me, a little glint of triumph in them. She clearly thought she had me. Oh, Karen, you sweet, misguided, trespassing fool, you have no idea. My own phone was still recording, capturing her every word, her every dramatic gesture, all set against the backdrop of my clearly marked property. This wasn't just evidence anymore, it was rapidly approaching comedic goal as Karen continued her dramatic monologue to the 911 operator, who I knew was my dear wife Sarah. I leaned against a sturdy oak tree, crossed my arms, and adopted an expression of mild curiosity. It was quite the performance. Karen was claiming I was aggressive, menacing, and that she felt acutely unsafe. She painted a picture of a damsel in distress, cornered by a brute. The reality, of course, was a middle-aged woman in Lululemon trespassing on private property, being politely asked to leave by the landowner, who was at that moment probably looking more bored than brutish. Yes, he exclaimed into the phone, gesturing towards me with a flourish. He's got tools. He could be dangerous. The tools in question were a pair of fencing pliers and a small hammer tucked into my belt. Standard equipment for checking fence lines, hardly instruments of terror, unless you're a particularly stubborn fence stable. I later got the full blow-by-blow from Sarah about her end of the call, and it was everything I imagined and more. She told me her console lit up, and the caller ID, while not immediately flagging Karen's home number, she was, after all, out in the wilds of my back 40, did show a cell pinging very close to our address when Karen started her shield. Sarah said she recognized the voice almost instantly. That particular brand of shrill entitlement was apparently quite distinctive. "Okay, ma'am," Sarah had said, her voice the epitome of calm professionalism, the kind she used for everything from fender benders to full-blown domestic disputes. "Can you describe the man for me?" Karen launched into a description that made me sound like a cross between a lumberjack berserker and a Bond villain. "He's large, very intimidating, and he's glaring at me. He claims this land is his, but it's clearly part of Whispering Pines." "And you said he has tools, ma'am?" Sarah asked, her pen probably poised. I could almost hear the subtle internal sigh. "What kind of tools are we talking about?" "Farming tools," Karen declared, as if that made them inherently sinister. "Sharp ones?" "He's clearly agitated that I've discovered his encroachment." Sarah, bless her heart, played it absolutely by the book, but with a delicious undercurrent of what I can only describe as malicious compliance in its most subtle form. All right, ma'am. Please try to remain calm. Officers are being informed of the situation. Are you in an immediate physical altercation? Not yet, Karen hissed, but he's trying to force me to leave. He's violating my rights to access community property. I understand, ma'am, Sarah said, her voice smooth as silk. Can you tell me exactly where you are? You mentioned a pond near Whispering Pines. Sarah knew my property layout like the back of her hand. She knew exactly which pond Karen was talking about, and knew, therefore, that Karen was unequivocally trespassing. But her job wasn't to litigate property disputes over the 911 line. It was to assess threat and dispatch accordingly. Back on my side of the